People always say they want to get away from it all. They romanticize the idea of total isolation. A cabin in the woods, off the grid, miles away from the noise of the city, the stress of modern life, the endless notifications. They think silence is peaceful. I used to think that too. That's exactly why I took the job as the winter caretaker at Blackwood National Park. The pay was unusually high for a job that essentially required me to just exist in a cabin and make sure the pipes didn't freeze. The park spans over 5,000 acres of dense forest, deep ravines, and open trails. In the summer, it's packed with tourists, but from November to March, it is strictly closed to the public. The snow gets too deep, the temperatures drop to lethal levels, and the county doesn't have the budget to keep the emergency roads clear. My interview was conducted by the head ranger, an older guy named Miller who looked like he had spent his entire life fighting the elements. He didn't ask about my resume. He just stared at me, his eyes studying my face. "It gets quiet out there, son," Miller told me, his voice gravelly. "I don't mean quiet like a library, I mean dead quiet. The snow absorbs whatever sound is left. Sometimes when there's absolutely zero audio input, your brain panics. It starts to fill the silence with things that aren't real. Can you handle true isolation?" I smiled confidently. I told him isolation was exactly what I was looking for. I wanted to be alone. Looking back now, I wish he had warned me that I wouldn't actually be alone. On my first day, Miller drove me up to the main caretaker's cabin in his heavily modified truck. He didn't say a word the entire drive. When we arrived, he kept the engine running, stepped out, and handed me a heavy set of keys and a laminated sheet of paper. "Read this," he said, not looking me in the eye. "Memorize it. It's not a suggestion list. It's the only way you make it to the spring thaw." Before I could even ask a question, he got back in his truck and drove off, leaving me standing in the freezing cold. The sound of his engine faded away, and then that silence he talked about rolled in. It was heavy, oppressive. I went inside, turned on the heater, made a pot of black coffee, and sat down to look at the laminated list. The first few rules made perfect sense for wilderness survival. Rule 1. Check the diesel generator every morning at 8 a.m. Rule 2. Do not leave the main cabin without your emergency flare gun and the two-way radio. Rule 3. Keep the radio tuned to channel 4 at all times, even if all you hear is static. But then the rules shifted. The tone changed from practical safety to something clinical and bizarre. Rule 4. If you are on a daytime patrol and you see a figure standing motionless in an open field, do not assume it's a lost hiker or a cross-country skier. Even if the sun is blindingly bright, do not approach it. The brightness of the snow confuses your depth perception. Stop immediately. Turn around and walk back to the cabin. Do not run. Running mimics prey drive. I chuckled, taking a sip of my coffee. I figured this was a hazing ritual, the veteran rangers trying to spook the new city boy. I kept reading. Rule 7. Between the hours of 2 p.m. and 3 p.m., you may hear a faint whistling coming from the tree line. It will sound exactly like your favorite song. Do not hum along. Do not acknowledge it. Simply cover your ears until the hour passes. Rule 9. If you find footprints in the fresh snow that look like bare human feet, trace them backward with your eyes. If the tracks start abruptly in the middle of nowhere, with no approach path, leave the sector immediately. Do not look up into the trees. I tossed the list onto the wooden table, shaking my head. "Funny guys," I muttered to the empty room. I spent the next 2 days settling into a routine. Wake up, check the generator, chop some wood, do a 2-hour patrol of the inner perimeter, and read books by the fire. It was actually beautiful, just like the footage you're watching right now. Endless white snow, crisp air, and a sun so bright it almost hurt to look at. Everything felt clean, untouched. I was starting to think I had found the best job in the world. Day 3 was when the illusion broke. It was a Tuesday. I stepped out from my midday patrol around 12:30 p.m. The weather was absolutely perfect, not a cloud in the sky. The sun was beating down, reflecting off the pristine snow, creating that brilliant, blinding white glare everywhere you looked. I was walking along the North Trail, feeling good, listening to the rhythmic crunch of my insulated boots breaking through the icy crust of the snow. Crunch, crunch, crunch. And then, I realized something was wrong. It wasn't a sudden scare. It was a slow, creeping realization that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I stopped walking. The silence was wrong. Even in the dead of winter, a forest is alive. You hear branches snapping under the weight of the snow. You hear the wind howling through the pine needles. But right then, at 1 p.m. in the afternoon, the world was on mute. The wind had completely died down. Not a single branch moved. It felt like somebody had pressed pause on the universe. My ears actually started to ring from the sheer pressure of the silence. I instinctively reached for the radio on my belt. Channel 4 was pure, dead static. I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the paranoia, and looked down the long, straight path ahead of me. About 60 yards down the trail, right in the center of the path, something was blocking the way. At first glance, my brain categorized it as a snowman. It made sense. Maybe some teenagers had hopped the fence the night before and built it as a joke. But as I stood there, squinting against the harsh glare of the midday sun, the details started to resolve, and my stomach tied itself into a cold knot. It was tall, unnaturally tall, easily pushing 7 feet. It was made of tightly packed, brilliant white snow. But it wasn't 3 round snowballs stacked on top of each other. It was anatomically perfect. It had the broad shoulders of a man wearing a heavy trench coat. It had arms hanging loosely at its sides. I could see the definition of fingers sculpted from the ice. I could see the folds in the snow, mimicking the wrinkles of fabric. But it had no face, just a smooth, perfectly round dome of blinding white snow where the head should be. And it was facing directly at me. My heart started to pound, a heavy, slow thud in my chest. I tried to tell myself it was an art project, some hyper-realistic ice sculpture left by a very talented, very trespassing artist. I took one step forward, just one, and then I noticed the shadow, or rather, the lack of it. The sun was directly overhead, slightly to the south. Every tree around us was casting a sharp, dark blue shadow onto the snow. I looked down at my own feet. My shadow was stretched out clearly beside me. But the 7-foot thing standing 60 yards away, it cast absolutely no shadow at all. The bright snow around its base was completely undisturbed. It was as if the sun didn't recognize it as a physical object. Rule number 4 flashed into my mind like a neon sign. If you see a figure standing motionless, even if the sun is blindingly bright, do not approach it. Turn around, do not run. It mimics prey drive. I swallowed hard. My throat felt like sandpaper. "Okay," I whispered, my voice sounding impossibly small in the vast, dead forest. "Just turn around." I pivoted slowly on my heel, moving deliberately. I didn't whip around. I didn't bolt. I faced the direction of the cabin. It was a 20-minute walk back, 20 minutes of exposing my back to whatever that thing was. I took my first step back towards the cabin. Crunch. Then I heard it. It came from behind me, from the direction of the figure. It wasn't the sound of footsteps. It was the sound of heavy, dense snow tearing, like a glacier cracking open. The horrific, grinding noise of stiff, frozen joints being forced to bend. Crack, crunch, slide. It sounded like heavy blocks of ice being dragged forcefully across the frozen path. "Do not run," the rule echoed in my head. "It mimics prey drive." I forced my leg forward. Crunch. Another step. Crunch. Behind me. Crack. Slide. It was moving. The thing with no shadow was moving, and it was matching my pace, but it was covering more ground. I could tell by the sound. It was getting closer. Every instinct in my DNA was screaming at me to sprint. The adrenaline was burning in my veins. I wanted to drop my heavy gear and run until my lungs bled. But I knew, with absolute terrifying certainty, that if I broke into a run, that thing would drop the slow, dragging charade and cross the distance between us in a heartbeat. So I walked. For 15 agonizing minutes, I walked a slow, steady march. The blinding sun mocked me. This wasn't supposed to happen in the daylight. Monsters are supposed to hide in the dark. But there was nowhere to hide here. Crack, slide. It was maybe 20 yards behind me now. I could feel a wave of unnatural, piercing cold radiating against my back. It was a cold that cut right through my insulated jacket, settling deep into my bones. The roof of the cabin finally appeared through the trees, my sanctuary. Crack, slide, 10 yards. I didn't dare look over my shoulder. I kept my eyes locked on the heavy wooden door of the cabin. I reached into my pocket, my fingers fumbling blindly for the metal keys. I grasped them, pulling them out as I hit the bottom of the wooden porch steps. I bounded up the 3 steps, ignoring the rule about running just for those last few feet. I slammed the key into the deadbolt, twisted it, shoved the door open, threw myself inside and slammed it shut with all my body weight. I turned the lock. I slid the heavy metal chain into place. I backed away from the door, gasping for air, my chest heaving. Bam! Something impossibly heavy slammed into the thick wooden door. The entire cabin shook. Dust fell from the rafters. The metal chain strained against its screws. I stumbled backward, tripping over a chair, and scrambled across the floor until my back hit the far wall. I grabbed the heavy fire axe from its mount next to the fireplace and held it tight across my chest. I waited for the door to splinter. I waited for the wood to give way, but nothing happened. After that single, earth-shattering blow, the silence returned. I sat on that floor for the rest of the day. I watched the sun slowly dip below the horizon through the window, terrified of what the night would bring. But the night was uneventful, just the wind howling outside. I didn't sleep a single minute. When the sun finally rose the next morning, painting the snow in that beautiful, deceitful bright light, I knew I was done. I packed my duffel bag. I walked over to the door and carefully, slowly, unchained it. I gripped the axe tightly and pulled the door open. There was no snowman. There was no monster. But on the wooden planks of the porch, right where the impact had happened, there was a massive puddle of melted water. And in the pristine snow leading right up to the bottom of the stairs, there were no footprints, just 2 deep, parallel grooves. Like something incredibly heavy had dragged itself all the way from the North Trail. I radioed Miller on Channel 4. I told him I was leaving. He didn't ask why. He just said he'd be there in an hour. When he arrived, I threw my bag into the back of his truck. He looked at the puddle on the porch, then looked at me. "Did you run?" he asked quietly. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "I walked." Miller nodded slowly. "Good man. That's why you're still breathing." I never went back to Blackwood National Park, and I never look at winter the same way. So if you're ever out enjoying a beautiful, sunny walk in the snow, and the woods get just a little too quiet, if you see something standing perfectly still in the blinding light, don't wait to see if it casts a shadow. Just turn around, and whatever you do, don't run.